Welcome to the webinar Can Socio-emotional competencies and diversity awareness be assessed? That is part of the activities within the Hand-in-Hand Empowering Teachers project, which is Erasmus Plus funded project that gathers together 11 partners from 6 different countries. The project itself is focused on teachers and supporting the development of their social emotional competencies as well as the diversity awareness in order for providing support to teachers to empower them to deal with the complexity of the everyday working life and all these new challenges that are arising with within the classrooms and schools as well. As our topic today is connected to the assessment, our lecturers today are Nina Roczen and Mojca Rožman from DIPF, Leibniz Institute for Research and Information in Education, which is our hand partner in charge of assessment development in the project and evaluation of the whole experiment. I will shortly introduce Nina and Mojca. Nina is a postdoctoral researcher focused on competencies in education for sustainable development, as well for the evaluation of the school development measures. And Mojca is a postdoctoral researcher as well, with the expertise in the international large-scale assessments, questionnaire developments, evaluation of experiments, and similar fields. As we recognize the rising interest in the topic of the socio-emotional competencies and diversity awareness in schools, this goes hand in hand with the interest for the assessments as well. So we have 2 great experts today here with us who will go through the all challenges as well as possibilities of these kind of measures. So Nina and Mojca, welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and I will now stop sharing, so the floor is yours.
Does everyone see my slides now? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Eva, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our work today. So Mojca and I will tell you something about how socio-emotional competences and diversity awareness, short SEDA, can be measured, and also what are the challenges that are related to measuring them, or to trying to measure them. So we will start with a short definition. So what are SEDA competences, and also why are they so important, especially in the school context, and also why can it be important to measure those competences. We wanted to also shortly introduce the Hand Empowering Teachers project, but I will do this very shortly because Eva has already done it. Thank you. And then we will look into more detail what are the different possibilities to measure SEDA competences, and also what are the challenges that are related to that. And we will conclude with some recommendations on what can best be done when one is to measure those competences. So what are SEDA competences? SEDA stands for social competences, emotional competences, and diversity awareness. For social competences based on the conceptualization of the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning, short CASEL, we differentiate between social awareness and relational competence. Social awareness is the ability to take different perspectives and also to accept those different points of view, respect for others, as well as appreciation of diversity. Whereas relational competence means the ability to build and to maintain constructive relationships. And the very central aspect there is the communicative competence. For emotional competences, again, based on the CASEL model, we distinguish self-awareness and self-management. Self-awareness relates to the ability to recognize one's own emotions, physical sensations and thoughts, and their influence on the own behavior. This also includes self-acceptance, and self-confidence, and recognizing one's own strengths. Whereas self-management means the ability to appropriately regulate one's own emotions, physical sensations, thoughts, and behaviors in various situations. And this includes the dealing with stress constructively, expressing one's emotions, the ability to motivate oneself, setting goals, and trying to work on achieving them. Diversity awareness means a person's acknowledgement of culture and social context variables like class, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, and religion. And it furthermore is seen as a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are needed for peacefully living and respectfully living in a culturally diverse society. It's also seen as a prerequisite for the critical understanding of the inequalities and injustice in the society. And thereby it's also seen as a precondition for social action in that field. So why are those SEDA competences so important? And here we will put the focus on the schools and on the teachers, because this is the focus of the hand-in-hand project. So SEDA competencies and teachers are associated with increased well-being and with burnout prevention. Furthermore, they are associated with improved relationships both with students and colleagues. They generally are also associated with better learning performance, with higher job satisfaction and job commitment also, and they can help teachers with creating more inclusive classrooms. So why can it be, or in which cases can it be important to measure SEDA competences? So basically there are two different kinds of situations in which it can be interesting to measure SEDA competences. So if we want to have an overview on the status quo of SEDA competences in a certain group, we can use those measures to have a look on where do we need support and where is special support needed. And then secondly, if we are planning to promote SEDA competences by certain trainings, of course, we want to use trainings that are especially efficient. Beforehand, we need those SEDA measures to answer the question whether a particular program is effective, both in the short term and also in the long term. So the Hand Empowering Teachers project, I can do that very shortly because most of it has already been set by Eva. So the goal is to promote SEDA competences to help teachers confront their everyday challenges. It's basically a mindfulness-based training program, and it also includes elements from family counseling approaches, as well as elements from diversity awareness and anti-discrimination trainings. And It's implemented in Austria, Croatia, Portugal, Slovenia, and Sweden. Okay, so when we are aiming at measuring SEDA competences, we are trying to measure psychological attributes. So here just a few characteristics that generally apply when we want to measure psychological attributes. So when we measure physical attributes like length, weight, temperature, and so on, we can just go and measure them directly. However, with psychological attributes like personality traits, emotional states, attitudes, and abilities, and this holds also true for SEDA competencies, of course, we cannot do that. We cannot measure them directly because in most of the cases they involve internal mental processes. So what can we do? We have different possibilities. If we still want to measure them, we can observe behavior and then make infer on those processes or psychological attributes from the behavior we can see and we can measure. And then we can also ask persons about their mental processes. So have persons self-report on their attitudes, competences, and so on. So for measuring SEDA competences and psychological attributes in general, we have different possibilities, different kinds of instruments we can use. These are questionnaire scales, observations, situational judgment tasks, tests, and interviews. And we will just give you some examples for each kind of instrument and also discuss a bit the pros and cons of each instrument. So questionnaire scales. The research on SEDA competences is largely based on self-reports. And why is that so? Questionnaire scales are very easy to use, very easy to implement, and also very easy to analyze, and also thereby also cost efficient. So I think this is the main reason why they are so popular. And yeah, most of the questionnaire scales look exactly as the one you see here in the example. This is a part of a questionnaire scale measuring empathy, so part of social awareness. So yeah, most of those scales look like that. They have a so-called question stem. Please respond to the following questions by selecting the choice that most closely reflects your feelings and beliefs. And then there are several statements, maybe 10 or 20, it depends on the instruments, that are all measuring the same thing, in that case, empathy. So for example, when I see someone receive a gift that makes them happy, I feel happy myself. Or I am good at understanding other people's emotions, and so on. And why are we doing that? Why aren't we just using one item? Because that would be really, we could save a lot of time if we would be doing that. However, if we just use one statement, we think that, or generally when using questionnaires, the idea behind that is that when answering one questionnaire, one item, it's not only caused by the person's empathy. In that case, there are a lot of other experiences and other traits and attitudes that are causing the answer. But if I use a lot of statements that are all targeting empathy, the idea is that the errors that are coming in are a bit leveled out, so to say. Yes, that's the idea. And in the end, by using an answer scale, in that case, it's a frequency answer scale, the participants can choose what suits their feelings and beliefs best. And then a score across all items is built. And the idea is, or it is assumed that that score represents that person's level, in that case, of empathy. And here you see another example that looks very, very similar, just to show you that many question scales have that format. So in that case, it is a scale targeting mindfulness. Just the example, I could be experiencing some emotion and not be conscious of it until some time later. And again, a frequency scale. But we also have alternative formats, more innovative formats that can be used. So here's an example we are also using in the hand-in-hand project that tries to measure the closeness that teachers feel towards their students, and that relational closeness is represented by circles that are more or less overlapping. So I just told you that questionnaire scales are really popular and really widely used, and that there are a lot of good reasons for it, but they also, there are also some challenges connected to them. On the one hand, it's really a very hard task to assess one's own SEDA competences. So that requires a high introspective ability, and people might differ in their ability to assess their own competences. So even if a person does his or her best, we might get not an accurate view of the actual competence because of that. And then furthermore, questionnaire scales are also susceptible to so-called response biases. There are different kinds of those biases. One is the social desirability. That means the tendency of people to describe oneself in a particular positively way, or also to try to meet the expectation of others. Then there's acquiescence, which means this is the tendency to say yes to statements if asked. So regardless of the content and regardless in which way it's formulated, just saying, yes, that's the case for me too. And then there's also the tendency to either use of the answer categories, either use the middle categories or use rather only the extremes, independently of what the real level of competence is, just as a kind of answering style. So to sum up for the questionnaires, they're on the pro side, they're really easy to use, easy to analyze, which makes them very cost efficient to use, and which also helps researchers to implement studies with large numbers of participants, and that gets us representative results. On the other hand, we have seen that those questionnaires can be either consciously or unconsciously be biased, and there might be also a lack of introspection ability to assess one's own SEDA competences. And what we also always have to keep in mind with questionnaires is that it only provides information on predefined topics. So the researchers have to know beforehand what is important in the case and what they want to research. So it is therefore less suitable if you don't know yet what is really the crucial thing. So for exploration purposes, other methods would be better. And with that, I hand over to Mojca.
Thank you, Nina. Warm welcome also from my side. I hope the transition from Frankfurt to Hamburg works smooth. And I hope you see my presentation now. Very good. So now we continue with another type of instrument, which are observations. So to get information about SEDA competencies, both methods, so introspective self-observation, but also external observation are useful. So for example, to get an information about anger, one can either observe one's own feelings and thoughts during an episode of anger or ask others to report their experience. But on the other hand, one can also watch other people, what they do, how they express themselves, what is their voice or body signs when they are angry. And both self-observation and external observation have been extensively used in researching social interactions, but also emotional competences. And over the years, both methods have evolved and now exist in several more or less standardized variants. Methods of observation comprise methods that are based on the observation of intersubjectively accessible aspects of psychological phenomenon. And this psychological phenomenon can be emotions or social interactions, and with or without the help of special observation instruments. So these observation instruments could either be video cameras or also physiological sensors. And further, with or without making inferences to underlying mental states. And usually observations make use of human observers. And these human observers are used as measurement devices. And this is why usually we are limited to or restricted to behaviors and events that are observable by humans. So behavior observation methods rely primarily usually on visual and acoustic information. And this is just reflecting the fact that sight and hearing are the two most information-rich sensory channels of humans. And one important feature of observation is that natural activities or situations are observed. And this observation can be done on the actual location, but also remotely using video technology. And increasingly, these technological advances make it possible also to monitor activities without disturbing the subject. So actually to come closer to the natural behavior. They are also suitable for situations when using questionnaire scales or other types of instruments is difficult. So this is especially the case when we deal with children or do research of social interaction. And here is an example of how this an observation record would look like. So this is from a study that was observing social interactions, and the task was to spend 15 minutes observing a child or a group of children and write down all the behaviors that are social and all the behaviors that might be signs that a child could use, support around developing social and emotional competence. And we see in the first column, the observer would note like the behavior, what happened. And then afterwards, they can extract like the relevant information. So what kind of social skills or behavior did they see? And they, in this case, they could also mark if there would be any other things they would like to discuss with the people that were with the trainers. So as I already said, the advantage of observation is that they record actual behavior, that we can reach groups that are difficult to interview, like, for example, children, and that they are they can achieve high objectivity because they don't rely on self-reports. But the disadvantage is that the realization and analysis is expensive and time-consuming, because afterwards, when we have the data collected, these records still need a lot of post-processing. And we do not usually wouldn't see any reasons for behavior. So we would just see what happened, but we wouldn't know why. And then another type are situational judgment tasks, and sometimes they are also called situational judgment tests or vignettes. These are short stories or scenarios that can be presented in a written form with pictures, but also in a video format. And participants are typically asked how they interpret the situation that is described in the scenario, and how would it be best to respond, how they would personally respond, or how they think a third person would respond. And the questions that relate to this scenario can be closed, so like in the questionnaires, with available response option, or open-ended. And the aim of this technique is to elicit rich but focused responses from the subject. And it can help explain subjects' own interpretations of social situation and meanings, as well as their individual beliefs. And in particular, if the scenarios include, for example, like a character that is breaking the norms, they can reduce pressure on subjects to provide socially desirable responses or answers. And this relative distance between the scenario and the subject can also help to address sensitive issues. And now here is an example. And this, so I will just read what it is about. So the text goes: a student who has just immigrated to a country is new to a class you are teaching. So I forgot to mention, this is a scenario that is for teachers. You notice that he is always sitting in a corner or on his own during school break times. He is sometimes late for lessons and usually has not done his homework. Some classmates sometimes give him funny looks, but they do not talk to him. So this is now the scenario, and then the teachers would get questions. And in this case, we ask them, what do you think? Why is the student behaving in that way? The second question was, what do you think? Why are his classmates behaving in this way? And the third question, what would you do if you were observing this situation in your school? And based on these responses, the content of the responses is then further coded based on a coding scheme. And then also what is also important is that these responses are coded by more than one person, so that we can also observe the consistency of the scoring. And the advantages of these techniques, this technique is that it's an approximation to actual behavior because it's showing a real situation, and that it's easy to collect the data. But again, as with observations, the analysis, specifically if the questions are open-ended, is expensive and time-consuming. And another disadvantage is that it only assesses interpretations, beliefs, and meanings in relation to this very specific situation that is described in the scenario. So the behavior or the reactions cannot be generalized. And then we come to the next instrument. So this is tests. So in psychology, tests are reserved for a very specific instrument. And usually a test is used to measure an individual's different abilities, such as their aptitude in a particular field, cognitive functions like memory and spatial recognition, or traits like, or personality traits like introvertedness. And usually tests are based on scientifically tested psychological theories and can be in a format of paper pencil, but also computer-based. And tests also can have different purposes. So one example to be is like selection or diagnosis. And there are 5 characteristics of the tests. So first one is objectivity. So the test should be free of subjective judgment. Reliability. So tests need to provide accurate information. They need to be valid. So they should measure what they are supposed to measure. They also usually have norms because the interpretation of the test score is usually based on a comparison with a group, so of the results of a group. And norms provide a basis for comparing the individual score with a group. And these norms are usually based on gender or different age groups, but also other relevant characteristics to the construct. And here we come to an example that is taken out of an emotional intelligence test. So I will just read one of the examples, the above one. So you've taken a group of 4-year-olds to the park and one of them starts crying because the others want to play with her. So what do you do? And then the respondents have an option to choose one of the 4 responses, which best would describe what he or she would do in this situation. So the first response option is stay out of it, let the kids deal with it on their own. The second, talk to her and help her to figure out ways in which to get the other kids to play with her. The third option, tell her in a kind voice not to cry. And the last option, try to distract the crying girl by showing her some other things she could play with. And usually each of these responses can be scored in a way that at the end, when we get all of the responses to the test, the result is reflecting the level of the trait or of the ability, and in this case, emotional intelligence. And the advantages of the tests are that they are a bit more difficult to manipulate than questionnaire scales. They are objective as usually per definition, and their analysis is easy and fast. But the disadvantage is, especially if we are trying to measure psychological traits, that sometimes the right or wrong response is not that clear. So actually it's highly dependent also on the context. And another disadvantage is that psychological tests require specialist knowledge to analyze and interpret them. So, I mean, maybe it's not a disadvantage by itself, but they cannot be as widely used as other instruments. And then we have interviews. And interviewing is probably most common and popular qualitative data collection technique. And usually it involves a dialogue with the researcher setting the agenda and asking questions, and the interviewee being cast in the role of respondent. And interviews as a specific type of dialogue can be more or less structured. So in structured interviews, we usually have wording in the order of the questions that is exactly the same from one interview to another. And in unstructured interviews, there is a more free-flowing conversation. And the respondents are encouraged to raise issues that originally were not included in the interview schedule. And semi-structured interviews is a combination of both, and they are actually the most commonly used. And this is, so a researcher sets the agenda on the basis of their own interest and topics, but it also, we also allow the participants to give responses to something that is relevant for them. And other distinctions are between one-to-one, so one-to-one versus group interviews, but also face-to-face versus telephone or interviewing through the internet. And how we could use interviews in measuring SEDA competences. So we could ask participants after a training if they noticed any changes in the behavior of the students and teachers in their school. And we would again get like single responses. And then as with observations, situational judgment tasks, and we would analyze them further, like put them in groups, make categories. And the advantages of the interviews are that they are capturing subjective perspectives. And in contrast to the questionnaire scales, they can capture important topics that would usually have been missed. But the disadvantages are that they are very subjective. So for example, if we would use more methods, we could see that the participants would say, oh, I really think this training made a difference in my social competencies. But if we would measure them with a test, we would see no increase or no change in the level of these competencies. And they're, again, also time-consuming and expensive in implementation and in analysis. And it's also, they are difficult to compare or generalize, but this is also depending on the degree of their standardization. So if we use very structured or less structured interviews. And with these, we are already at the conclusions. So we presented today different options of measuring social-emotional and diversity awareness competences. And we saw for each measurement type or method the advantages and disadvantages. So not all of the methods are suitable for our purposes. That's why the choice of the instrument types depends also on the research objective, on the context, but also some other factors. So how much time is available, but also the financial resources. And different instrument types provide different perspectives. And if we are interested in a complete picture or we should use several instruments combined to get information from different perspectives. And with that, I think we are done with our presentation. So thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Mojca. Thank you, Nina. As Mojca said, now is the time for you to ask your questions, or if you have any comments, something you would like to share about this topic, just you can raise your hand, or if you're not comfortable, perhaps ask in a chat. Perhaps while we're waiting for, oh yeah, Magnus, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. I'm sorry I was a little bit late for the seminar because I was at another meeting, but I have a question about, we have done other research when we have questionnaires, sometimes on paper and pen and sometimes online. And we are doing comparisons between these different years, and we see another pattern when they answer online, and we don't know if it's really a change or more of the change of the instrument. So what are your experience when students answer a Likert scale, for example, on a paper and pen, compare with if they do it online?
Maybe I start, Mojca, and you can add on that. I have to say, I personally haven't done research on that, so I don't know it from my own research. I just know that there are really significant differences between the two forms, and that you may never just interchange it. You know, I know this was a huge discussion in the PISA study when they were changing from paper and pencil to computer-based assessment, and that they were not properly doing research on what it means. But yeah, I mean, I could imagine that maybe, but I wouldn't know which form, that one of the forms gives you a better feeling of anonymity, and that you could be more open then. But it's just what I assume. I don't know, Mojca, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the online filling out the questionnaires also involves like how used the kids are with getting the digital, I don't know, also tools. I mean, I think it also depends on the device. I know that there is a lot of research out there, but I am also like not very experienced in that. But I can imagine that there are other skills that are needed to fill out. I mean, it depends also on the question and how is it presented. But I also saw that there are some experience in the audience. So I don't know if somebody else wants to share.
Yes, Lisa commented that they have done something similar. Hi, Lisa.
Yeah. Hi, I'm sorry that because I'm with the baby, the video was not on. But we've done something like that with reading tests. So that's different than personality questionnaires or something like that. But in reading tests, we could see definitely in several age groups and also with vocabulary tests that the children, not adults, answered quicker but less accurate in the digital version. So we tend to read more superficially and to be like, yeah, whatever, I'm just clicking on something, and you don't have that in the print, or at least with the reading you have it less. And I think we can put that to the questionnaire topic as well, because sometimes when you're reading it online, you're just like click, 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 whatever, yeah. And when you're reading it in print, the question, you might concentrate more and be like, okay, what do I really think? What do I really feel? So maybe the paper feeling has more time, consumes more time, and you give it more time. I don't know how to explain it, but that's just my interpretation. That's not the statistical whatever. That was just with our reading test. It was definitely like that. I'm not sure about the personality things.
Thank you, Lisa. If anyone else would like to add or share anything, feel free to do so via chat or just unmute yourself. While you are thinking, I have a question. I mean, I'm not a researcher, so I will put this disclaimer right away. But I found interesting when Nina, you were talking about how one of the challenges for these questionnaire skills are high introspective abilities that are needed. So I'm just wondering, if there is a change, is this change now because people went through the program and understood the concepts better, or is it because they understand themselves better? Is there any way, like, can this be somehow perhaps distinct, or is it the same thing? I was just wondering, like, is the change, if it occurs, is it because they understand themselves better, or if they are more familiar with the concepts because of the program? I'm sorry if it's too simple question, but this is what came to my mind.
Thank you, Eva. I think it's a very good question, and it's a very difficult one also. I mean, I think what you said might be exactly what was happening in our first hand-in-hand project, because we were observing very strange results. For example, that we measured the accretion before and after the program, and then after all this mindfulness training, this wonderful project, in some groups there was more aggression afterwards, more aggressive behavior. How can that be? And then we don't know, maybe it's really just risen up in the training group. But the other hypothesis that we had is that the introspective abilities, just what you said, were enhanced through this mindfulness training, and that people just were more aware that sometimes they have aggressive feelings, or I don't know. So this might be exactly the effect, but in our design, how we were measuring things, we weren't able to disentangle both. So yeah, it would need even more kinds of measurements, more perspectives to find out, did it really the competence change, or just the ability to assess my own competence? Yeah, that's all I can say, I think.
Great, thank you. Anna?
I think it's an excellent question, Eva. It's difficult to disentangle, but I have a maybe association or a thought. A question like this could possibly be asked in interview. What do you think? In a sense that if for instance, after intervention, like hand in hand, respondent says, well, I feel better, or I feel more mindful, or whatever, and then if we add like a specific question, do you think that is because you know about these things a lot, or how does that show in behavior? So this is more like okay, maybe we could go maybe we can go into this question with additional questions on interview, because I don't see how from the questionnaire itself we can see that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a very good idea, and it's a good way to go, and we have to keep it in mind for our own interviews. And yes, I mean, that's generally what we sometimes hope to do with our interviews, that we get some more explanations for why we find some effects maybe through the questionnaire scales, and then with the interviews we get some insights on why is there an effect, how did this happen, and this would be another thing to tackle it. And I just had a small idea on how within the questionnaire we could get some insights, because we also have questions on the mindfulness, and the one questions I showed to all of you was I could have an emotion and not be aware of it until much later, and maybe you could use some of those items to validate others. But yeah, I don't know whether it would work. It's maybe worth trying.
Thank you. Magnus?
Yeah, I can just follow up, because I myself really fond of questionnaires and Likert scales, and I think it's these kind of self-reporting are quite effective in many senses. But my experience, I think I've told this on some meetings sometimes, we have a big science project on a school we follow for, where students every month answered a questionnaire about sense of belonging and these kind of things. And from October, when this started, until January and February, all this our measurements about sense of belonging and so, they were falling down. But then from January they were increasing to May about how they feel about school. And if you think about it, okay, January in Sweden is not that nice. May is much nicer. It's end of the school, the summer is coming, also October. It's so it's a lot of things that we can see in these questionnaires. But then we do interview with the students in May, and they were really fond of the project. So we got a lot of, so I used to say that in some sense a questionnaire is like black and white picture, and when you do interviews you can just color on it. You can really understand something that's happening, because sometimes you get surprised of the questionnaire, and then you must really think about what really are we measuring? What do we see here? It's not easy to find out every time.
Yes, thank you, Magnus. The context is always important. Anyone else who would like to share or add something? Perhaps if someone has experience in doing assessment on the SEDA competencies. Okay, then. I will then thank you all for coming and participating. As I said, materials will be available for participants afterwards, and also a big thank you to Nina and Mojca for their presentation and to getting these concepts and how to measure them a bit closer to us. So thank you, Nina, thank you, Mojca, and thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully, oh, Helene, oh, you are clapping. Thank you. Yes, so hopefully we will see each other again, and follow our website and Facebook, and I'm sure there will be similar activities in the future, and we can all continue to learn and share our knowledge on this topic. Thank you all for coming, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.